This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. A fiery exchange at the U.S. presidential debate, with both candidates trading accusations that the other has yielded to rival superpower China. Well, we'll have all the analysis from the clash between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Beijing's top diplomat Wang Yi meets Russian officials at a security meeting for BRICS economies. Are they gearing up to challenge Western hegemony? And South Korea warns against growing military ties between Russia and North Korea that Seoul says is advancing Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions. And Pope Francis arrives in Singapore, the final stop of his Asia-Pacific tour. He'll engage in state meetings and celebrate a papal mass tomorrow. Also, the yen rallies to its strongest this year after the Bank of Japan signals it is ready to raise interest rates, while markets are anticipating its U.S. peer will cut. Also in East Asia tonight, from Gucci to Versace, more luxury fashion brands are enlisting K-pop stars to be their new face. We'll tell you why they generate more media buzz than Western celebrities. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have declared victory after coming face-to-face for the first time in a fiery presidential debate with just 8 weeks left in the race to the White House. Well, the two candidates crossed swords over key policy differences over immigration and abortion and spent much of the time sparring over the economy. Ms. Harris and Mr. Trump accusing each other of yielding to China.
Under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out, when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet.
What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever. China was paying us hundreds of billions of dollars, and so were other countries.
Ms. Harris also accused her opponent of inviting trade wars, while Mr. Trump hit back, saying American workers are losing jobs to other nations.
Part of building a clean energy economy includes investing in American-made products, American automobiles. It includes growing what we can do around American manufacturing.
They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China. They're building these massive plants, and they think they're going to sell their cars into the United States.
Well, the debate at times also turned personal. Ms. Harris repeatedly baiting her opponent into ranting instead of focusing on the issues.
It is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace.
Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's gone to my philosophy. But if she ever got elected, she'd change it. And it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well.
Earlier, we spoke with U.S. politics professor Timothy J. Lynch at the University of Melbourne, who shared his thoughts on whether there's a winner from the debate.
I think Kamala Harris won it. She won it much more decisively, I think, than many people imagined. I don't think this guarantees that she'll win the general. In lots of ways, though, she corrected all sorts of misapprehensions, particularly on our own side, that if given free rein, she would just produced gaffe after gaffe. She was no gaffe machine this evening in Pennsylvania. She was actually very polished, and the cramming and the rehearsing, which we understand that she has done, paid off. I don't think Trump was crushed. And in lots of ways, I think Trump landed some blows, and Trump was Trump. So I don't think his position was reduced, but hers was certainly elevated by a much better performance than many imagined. It's certainly going to be spun as a resounding victory for her. But I just have some caveats that doesn't mean Trump will lose and that she will win. But it's not this performance, and this was the great fear of her campaign, was that this would actually ruin her chances. It's done the opposite. It's actually enhanced them.
We also spoke with William Schneider from George Mason University, and he thinks that while Donald Trump is tough, Kamala Harris came off stronger than most would have expected.
Well, I think Donald Trump came across as very, very angry. Now, I don't know if that's going to succeed with American voters, because his anger was right there up front. He attacked the Biden administration. He attacked Kamala Harris. He attacked her record. He attacked her plans. And that anger is felt by a lot of Americans. I don't know if it's a majority or enough to make him president, but he is clearly the president who tries to convey the anger that a lot of Americans feel. He is a strong candidate, and that was very clear tonight. But she came across as able to fight with him, to reprimand him when she thought he got something wrong. She came across as much tougher than anyone probably expected, and I think that was to her benefit. On some issues, he was very good. He talked about the terrible the administration's policies on Afghanistan, bringing up the most vulnerable point in the entire Biden record. But she was very strong on the issue of abortion rights, which is a key issue in this election for a lot of voters.
So how do the two presidential candidates differ on their approach to China? Well, we'll have more analysis later in the show with our special guest, Professor Elvin Lim. China's top diplomat Wang Yi is in St. Petersburg meeting officials from the emerging economies of the BRICS group. Well, since his arrival, Mr. Wang has been emphasizing the importance of solidarity and cooperation within the global south. For the next 2 days, Mr. Wang will be discussing security issues with high-ranking officials from the BRICS group, and they include Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and new members like Iran and Egypt. The group wants stronger cooperation among developing countries to counterbalance what both Beijing and Moscow call Western hegemony. And for more, we have Dasha Chernyshova joining us live from Moscow. Dasha, first up, perhaps can give us the latest lines coming out from the BRICS security meeting?
Yes, indeed. In the opening remarks that the security officials from the BRICS countries have made, we understand that they want to review the main security challenges that the international community is facing at the moment. They want to discuss the practical activities of the working groups when it comes to counteracting terrorism, as also the information technologies and all the threats coming from these area extremisms. They do want to see where they can help one another and contribute to the security of another nation. Now, the main leitmotif, obviously, that we are hearing from this meeting is that the global south has to cooperate with the BRICS, and BRICS should serve as a platform for the cooperation for the developing countries as well as the global south in countering any security threats, because they are interfering with the steady development of these countries. Now, we've heard from the Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Sergei Shoigu, speaking there and saying that it is the erosion of the international security system that is threatening the sovereign countries. So all in all, we understand this meeting is important in terms of bringing the countries on the same page when it comes to the approaches they have facing the security challenges. But also, it is the preparation for the summit of the BRICS leaders that is expected to take place next month in Kazan.
Well, leading up to this meeting, I believe Wang Yi met with the Russian Security Council Secretary Shoigu. What did the two agree upon?
Well, that was indeed yet another meeting between the high-ranking Russian and Chinese officials. So in this meeting, we've heard both sides confirming the strategic nature of the relations that Moscow and Beijing have at the moment. We've heard that this meeting was also the proof of the all-encompassing partnership. This is according to Sergei Shoigu, the Secretary of Russia's Security Council. He also has said that there is the steady support that Beijing is playing to the Russian chairmanship in the BRICS group. Now, we understand that this meeting, he said, will help to even tighten and bring the relationship between the two even further. Now, we understand also that there are issues that stay behind the closed doors. This is where we don't know what they were talking about. But the general line that we are hearing is that the two countries, both Russia and China, they do want to make sure that BRICS serves as the platform of multilateral world order that is being established. And we've heard from the multiple officials actually in this BRICS meeting already on Wednesday, saying that it is the multipolarity that is driving those countries together in one room. And this is why they are talking about. So Moscow and Beijing, they want to make sure that BRICS is serving as this platform, and they want to put their best effort into ensuring that. So this was one of the prime focuses of the meeting between Wang Yi and Sergei Shoigu.
And Dasha, as you've mentioned earlier, the presidents of Russia and China, they are slated to meet next month. What can we expect then?
Well, first of all, we expect that to be the BRICS Leaders Summit, where the declaration will be adopted by the entire group and their vision of the future of this grouping. But also keep in mind that Moscow and Beijing have announced that they have the all-encompassing strategic partnership relationship. So the whole host of bilateral issues is also expected to be discussed. There are multiple issues that are at the moment important for the two countries. In Russia, there have been the issues that have been admitted by the Kremlin, such as the problems with the payments with the Chinese banks because of most likely the fear of the secondary sanctions from the Western countries. There are also issues that are related to the bilateral trade and to the exploration of new areas where these two countries can be working together. But this is the work for the groups and ministers and other governmental organizations. So at the Leaders Summit in Kazan and in the bilateral meetings, it is expected that the leaders will be able to finalize and iron those arrangements that have been previously made.
Dasha Chernyshova reporting from Moscow on the BRICS security meeting. Thank you. Well, the U.S. is expected to send a more senior official to China's top security forum this year. Another sign the superpower's military ties are on the mend. Well, senior Pentagon official Michael Chase is set to lead the U.S. delegation. Defense officials and scholars from nearly 100 countries and international organizations will gather at the Xiangshan Forum in Beijing starting tomorrow. And CNA's Tan Sihui has this report.
The Xiangshan Forum started with just 14 countries in its first iteration in 2006. It grew to more than 70 in 2018, and half a decade later to more than 90. This year's forum is set to be its biggest.
Before, it was one among many. Now, given that there's been reduced contact between the PRC and in particular the US and some of its allies, it becomes one of the fewer available conduits for some level of exchange to happen.
The Xiangshan Forum has become a yearly affair since 2015. It's styled as China's answer to the Shangri-La Dialogue, Asia's premier security gathering in Singapore. Scheduled months after the Singapore dialogue that typically happens around mid-year, it's being seen as a platform for China to respond to views aired during the Shangri-La Dialogue, which China continues to criticize as being westernized.
In the Shangri-La Dialogue, the PRC criticizes as much as it receives criticism and would prefer a more managed environment like the Xiangshan Forum that allows them to put their point across. The real point is about having it after the Shangri-La Dialogue, where I suppose Beijing may feel that the Xiangshan Forum provides an opportunity for them to respond to what they see as criticism coming out from the Shangri-La Dialogue.
The U.S. typically sends a lower-level delegation to the Xiangshan Forum compared to the Singapore dialogue, which is typically represented by its defense chief. This year, the U.S. attendance takes place after Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jin met U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Singapore in June.
It's good for the U.S. to be represented because it will provide an avenue for China and the U.S. to meet, and if they want, they can actually also meet behind closed doors to further thrash out issues. I think the U.S. will continue to stress the importance of freedom of navigation and its right to fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows.
Last year, the U.S. sent a delegation led by Zanti Garas, the China Country Director in the Office of Under-Secretary of Defense. Other Western countries have either shunned or sent small and low-level delegations. The Xiangshan Forum is expected to feature a significant number of countries from the global south, which China is focusing its outreach. More recently, the forum also gave rare but prominent billing to Russia, which received international scrutiny over its invasion of Ukraine. Tan Si-hui, CNA, Beijing.
Another defense summit is on this week in South Korea, this one drawing senior officials from the U.S. South Korea's new defense chief says all options are on the table to protect itself if Pyongyang refuses to stop its nuclear weapons program. Mr. Kim Jong-un was speaking at a defense dialogue in Seoul just one day after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed an exponential boost to his country's nuclear arsenal. CNA's Lim Yun-suk has more.
Barely a week into his job as South Korea's defense minister, Kim Jong-un has a strong warning for his international counterparts on Russia and North Korea's military alliance.
러시아로부터 받은 기술과 자금을 이용해서 북한 자체적인 어떤 북한의 핵과 미사일을 고도화시키는 그런 노력을 하고 있는 상황입니다. 그러다 보니까 북한의 핵 미사일이 하루가 멀다고 고도화되고 있는 상황인데요. 이것이 단순히 어떤 우리 한반도의 위협, 미국의 위협 이게 아니고요. ICBM까지 다 이게 탑재할 수 있는 능력을 가지고 있다면 어느 나라도 자유롭지가 못하다는 것이죠.
He said all options were on the table if North Korea does not stop its weapons development program.
북한의 핵이 계속 고도화되고 또 국제사회의 변화가 생겨서 북한의 핵 위협으로부터 우리 국민의 안전을 또 지역 안전을 지키기에 제한된다고 판단이 된다면 그때는 다양한 모든 방법을 열어놓고 검토할 것이다. 다만 그때는 한미 동맹의 긴밀한 협의하에 진행될 것이다.
Mr. Kim was speaking on Wednesday at the Seoul Defense Dialogue, his first international appearance since he took up his post last week. The Seoul Defense Dialogue has been held every year since 2012, and it brings military leaders from around the world to discuss security issues, especially on the Korean Peninsula. Addressing the forum, NATO's military committee chief, Rob Bauer, voiced concerns over the complex dynamics between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran.
The relations between Russia and China, Russia and North Korea, Russia and Iran is very concerning. Russia is basically, in a way, supporting illegal actions from a country like North Korea when it comes to the missile tests. That is in violation with all sorts of UN Security Council resolutions, and they're not doing anything about it. Unfortunately, China doesn't do anything about it as well, and that is very concerning.
Both Russia and China this week sent greetings to North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un to mark North Korea's founding anniversary on September 9th. In a speech to mark the occasion, Kim Jong-un said his country was facing a grave threat because of the U.S.-led regional military bloc, which is now developing into a nuclear-based threat. And that was why North Korea was expanding its military capabilities. Lim Yun-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, an influential Japanese business executive weighs in on the $39 billion bid for 7&i Holdings, which it rejected as being too low. And a potential brick within the EU ranks after the Spanish Prime Minister calls on the bloc to rethink plans to impose extra tariffs on Chinese EVs. Hello again. Good to have you in East Asia tonight, right here on CNA. You are just in time for business, and Roland Lim, he is raring to go to give us the latest in business news, and it's about the yen again. A weak yen some time back, hogging the headlines, but now there's an about turn. What's that all about?
That's right. The yen bulls are having a nice little run alongside with some other Asian currencies. Now, these currencies strengthening today as the dollar retreated in reaction to the fiery U.S. presidential debate. The greenback also weaker ahead of key inflation data out later, which could lead the Federal Reserve to trim interest rates by a bigger margin than expected. Japanese currency is today's outperformer in Asia. It rose nearly 0.9% against the dollar at one point to 140.71. That's its highest this year. The yen currently is at 141.59 and it is up 0.58% against the dollar. The strong yen, however, hurting Japanese stocks, particularly the exporters Nikkei 225, sliding almost 1.5% at the close, down for a seventh straight session. Now, Japanese stocks could be in for more pain as the yen may rise further after a senior Japanese central bank official signaled readiness to raise rates again. That's if inflation is back on track. The Bank of Japan Policy Board member Junko Nakagawa, however, also stressed that before making such a move, it must account for the impact on the economy and on prices. Also getting a lift today is the Chinese currency. Investors betting that a Kamala Harris presidency would mean reduced risk of punitive tariffs on Chinese goods. The former President Trump had floated a blanket 10% import tariff and much higher levies on Chinese goods. Japan's biggest steelmaker, Nippon Steel, is reportedly mounting a last-ditch effort to save its proposed takeover of Pennsylvania-based firm U.S. Steel. The Financial Times reports that Nippon's vice chair, Takahiro Mori, has flown to Washington to meet senior U.S. officials. Now, he's said to be scheduling talks with several deputy secretaries working under the interagency committee that reviews national security implications on foreign investments to the U.S. Now, it's the Japanese company's last attempt to salvage their $15 billion takeover of U.S. Steel. Now, that deal would have created one of the world's biggest steel companies outside of China. And it had been hailed by investors as the answer to the financial woes of the 123-year-old U.S. Steel. But the proposed acquisition ran into resistance from the U.S. Steelworkers Union and politicians, who fear that the deal would create national security risks. It's also become a contentious issue in the U.S. presidential election, with both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump framing the deal as a threat to American jobs. Even as analysts assess the acquisition may actually benefit the local steel sector over the long term. Nippon Steel shares closing almost 2.5% lower today as prospects for the acquisition hang in the balance. A highly regarded Japanese business executive has waded into the ongoing takeover bid for 7&I Holdings. Suntory Holdings CEO Takeshi Ninami says that the operator of the 7-Eleven stores has, quote, responded fairly to the takeover bid from Canada's Alimentation Couche-Tard. The 65-year-old, who has advised current and former Japanese prime ministers, is seen as one of the country's most influential executives. Mr. Ninami says that 7&I's rejection of the $39 billion bid indicates a shift in Japan's corporate governance. Now, he added the takeover offer has made other Japanese CEOs nervous about being potential targets. Now, he was the CEO of convenience store operator Lawson before becoming the first non-founding member to head beverage giant Suntory. He also stated that Japan's corporate governance reforms are forcing companies to focus more on generating returns. But Mr. Ninami says Japanese companies still have a, quote, strong appetite to invest in the U.S. That's as outbound deal value stands at 17-year highs despite a historically weak yen. Now, China has opened a criminal investigation into Highwind Wealth Management for alleged involvement in illegal fundraising. This comes 9 months after Highwind pledged to address delayed payments on some investment products. The probe into what was once the nation's biggest distributor of real estate wealth management products underscores how China's middle-class investors are caught up in the property crisis. A talk that Highwind would delay payments surfaced last December, and that sank the shares of its U.S.-listed entity, Highwind Holdings. It then changed its name to Santec earlier this year and severed ties with Highwind Wealth. Established back in 2006, the Shanghai-based Highwind has more than 152,000 clients and $1.2 billion in assets under management as of June last year. Now, it's unclear how much investor money is involved. According to its listing prospectus, Highwind had worked with developers such as China Evergrande Group and Sunac. Now, once China's biggest developer, Evergrande, collapsed earlier this year after defaulting on its bonds and amassing debts exceeding $300 billion. Greater China markets ending mixed. The Hang Seng retreated to a one-month low. Oil producer Sinopec led the losers after prices fell more than 4% overnight. In Shanghai, investors remained cautious amid renewed concerns on the weak domestic consumption that could weigh down on economic growth. But the tech-focused Xiangshan component, well, it did buck the trend, tracking the overnight gains on big tech firms listed on Wall Street. The weak domestic demand in China has been discouraging European firms from operating in China. The latest report from the EU Chamber of Commerce in China found its members harbor doubt that the government has a credible plan to boost demand in the ailing economy. The survey showed the Chamber's members were resigned to the fact that the problems they're facing are becoming permanent features rather than, quote, growing pains. Now, this has caused more of them to lose appetite in investing in China. In 2023, EU foreign direct investment flows to China dropped by 29% from the previous year to around $7 billion. The Spanish Prime Minister has urged the European Union to re-examine its plan to impose additional tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles. Pedro Sanchez made the comments at the end of his 3-day visit to China, underlining simmering EU divisions over the trade measure.
España quiere jugar un rol constructivo, de tender puentes, porque creo que no convienen guerras comerciales y debemos encontrar una solución de compromiso, de negociación, que estoy convencido de que entre todos vamos a lograr alcanzar y que eso contribuya a afianzar la relación bilateral entre China y la Unión Europea, que a mí me parece que es fundamental tanto para la sociedad china como para la sociedad europea.
Experts say the Spanish Premier's comments raise the prospect that national leaders could try to muster enough support to block the European Commission's efforts to impose restrictions on Chinese EV imports. Now, such a move would represent a dramatic reversal for EU trade chiefs in Brussels. The European Commission, which oversees the bloc's trade policy, announced last month that it planned to levy 5-year import duties of up to 36% on EVs imported from China. The Spanish PM's China visit comes against the backdrop of mounting trade tensions between the European Union and China. In June, China launched an anti-dumping investigation into pork imports from the bloc. And Spain is, of course, the biggest European pork exporter to China. And you're up to date with the business news, Natalie.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, who landed the best punches at the U.S. presidential debate? And will it make a difference at the polls? We check in with an expert after the break. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have declared victory after coming face-to-face for the first time in a fiery presidential debate. The White House hopefuls accusing each other of yielding to rival superpower China. Meantime, Beijing's top diplomat Wang Yi meets officials from BRICS economies in St. Petersburg to review security challenges facing member states. South Korea sounds the alarm over the growing military ties between Russia and North Korea, saying it's helping Pyongyang improve its nuclear and missile capabilities. The U.S. presidential debate has snap polls and commentators declaring Ms. Harris the winner, despite Mr. Trump calling it his best performance. And here is a breakdown of how each candidate made use of their time during the debate. Well, Donald Trump spoke for some 43 minutes in all, spending about 30% of that time attacking Kamala Harris. Well, Ms. Harris, on the other hand, was much more aggressive, devoting close to half her speaking time of nearly 38 minutes on attacking Mr. Trump. Well, the vice president's offensive eclipsed that of President Joe Biden's in his debate with Mr. Trump back in June. Ms. Harris spent 4 minutes more than the president in attacking Mr. Trump, while keeping to a similar speaking time. The economy, abortion rights, democracy, and immigration are among topics both candidates spent most of their time on. Well, Ms. Harris spoke most on the U.S. economy, while it was immigration for Mr. Trump. On foreign policy, the Russia-Ukraine war was the overriding concern. The candidates spent 8% of their time on it. Next, the Israel-Hamas war at 5%. The U.S. pullout from Afghanistan took 4% of the time. Trade tariffs at 3%. And when it comes to China, a country the U.S. regards as a systemic rival on multiple fronts, including technology and trade, just 2% of the debate, or just over 2 minutes, was spent on it. But we are East Asia tonight, after all, and to shed more light on this, closer to this region, we have with us Professor Elvin Lim. He is Dean, College of Integrative Studies at the Singapore Management University. And Professor Lim, just based on the fiery exchange between the two U.S. presidential candidates on countering China, I'm wondering, how do you see their approaches differ?
Thanks for having me on. So their approaches are basically a traditional Republican-Democrat distinction, where Republicans in general prefer a more one-on-one bilateral approach to dealing with nations, including China, as well as nations around the region, whereas Democrats in general take a more multilateral approach where they hope to build alliances around the region. So what's interesting here is, and that's part of the reason why China is not clear which candidate is better for them, in part because a multilateral approach will actually create more of a choice forced on nations in this region to take a pick between which of these two hegemons they would side on. Whereas Trump's more isolated, one-on-one, sporadic, episodic strategy gives nations in this region a chance to double date and not take a clearer stand. And that's one of the reasons why, in some ways, China may prefer a more bilateral approach that the Trump side is endorsing.
That's a very interesting point you made there, Professor. But I just want to single out a few lines here and there. One of it, which was Harris, her critique that Trump has sold us out on China. That's what she said, suggesting, I guess, somewhat that she thinks that his approach is misguided. How do you think, then, because she talked about how, the U.S. should be competing with China in areas like AI and quantum computing. How do you think that is going to change the U.S.-China dynamics?
I think the Biden administration has been actually very tough on China. Trump talks about tariffs, but people are less clear about whether or not he can pull off this 60% hike in tariffs imports from China, because the American consumer is going to feel it, right? It's going to be passed on directly. So, we have to pierce through the rhetoric, which is very fierce at this time, obviously, because there's a run-up to the elections. And really what they're doing with these statements is to signal to their bases, respectively, that they are strong leaders, that they're presidential. Kamala Harris, of course, is standing toe-to-toe to the former president. And she wants to show that she's tough and strong, too. And that's why she was strongly on the attack, much more than Joe Biden was, as you showed in your analysis a few minutes ago. And I think this is more really playing to an internal domestic audience, rather than speaking specifically about a specific policy direction or change from where Biden was. And to be fair, Biden has also been very tough on, he inherited, as Trump notes, the tariffs, held on to it. So in some ways, you can say that the reason why only 2% of the time was spent on China is because this is a rare place where both parties are equally on board. They recognize the strength of China as a rising hegemon in the world.
Good point, referring to the stats that we flashed out earlier. Now, Biden, you've said, he has been tough on China, but, Trump this time around, he's claiming credit for being even tougher on China. So do you think his actions during his presidency actually resulted in significant changes, whether it's to do with China's behavior or U.S.-China relations?
No. I mean, the fact is, he does a bit of double speak sometimes, which is very effective politically. I'll give him that. And that is, he's rhetorically very strong. But on the other hand, he also faced things like, I respect Xi Jinping, I respect Putin, I respect, he's trying to register this message that he's tough on them. But at the same time, he also respects them. And this plays well to his base because they think that having a strong relationship is the basis on which tough and honest negotiations can happen. But it can also swing in the other direction where sometimes people feel that he's been too cozy with world leaders, including Xi Jinping. And that's why you can see that actually policy-wise, although there are, assertions of tariffs and these strong commitments that the United States make vis-a-vis the deficit imbalance, the trade imbalance, you actually find that across both administrations, there has been a relatively constant economic relationship between the two, and one that will be intensifying in the years to come.
And you've talked about, China's leaders, how they're interpreting the candidates' positions. But I'm curious to know, what do you think of the other East Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan? How do you think they're perceiving the debate? I mean, do they have a preference for one approach over the other?
Here I will be speculating. I don't have diplomatic ties to them, but my guess is the United States has bases in many countries around the world. And of course, they have particularly strong ties with these countries historically, South Korea and Japan, precisely because these Northern Asian countries have always had a testy relationship with their neighbor, China. So I would say these larger North Asian countries do see it in their benefit, that would be my speculation, to have a stronger U.S. presence, a multilateral presence, and therefore a Harris administration. I think it would be a slightly different story, apropos my earlier point, for smaller nations, ASEAN nations, who are not clearly in such a tight relationship with the U.S. historically and do have business ties with China.
Well, I need your speculation again here for the next question, because I'm wondering, after this debate, are we any closer to knowing how the next U.S. administration will approach, as we all know, the complex and sensitive relationship with China?
So it will depend very much on who wins, I suppose. And as far as I can tell today, the polls, the momentum appear to be going for Harris. She has more pathways to the 270 electoral college votes that are required for victory into the White House. She basically needs to keep the blue wall going. So I'll have to base my speculations on that. And of course, I should say that this is by no means a done deal. Anything can happen. October surprises can happen and whatnot. But if she does win, and I say her chances are 60-40 today, can easily change, she will certainly dive into the domestic economy. This is the main thing that she cares a lot about, and that's why it came out again in your analysis of the debate. And to the extent that the deficit with China, the relationship with China, impinges on her domestic program, then yes, she will certainly take a more tough stance on China. But I shall say that in the initial months of a presidential administration, for one that is a first term, it's usually domestic. And so for better and for worse, the policies will focus more on the domestic promises that she made on the campaign trail. And usually only towards the end of the first term, they might turn to foreign policy and relations with Ukraine and China. So there's a bit of time for countries to wait, pause, and reset if there's a change in administration.
Right, just very quickly, Professor, before I let you go, I'm just wondering what questions or topics related to China were notably absent from the debate that you would have liked to see it addressed today?
I wouldn't say there's anything I would like to see, but what was unusual was that Democrats generally talk about, spreading democracy and importance of human rights, and that's usually one of the issues that's brought up, right, when talking about China and Hong Kong and whatnot. And that didn't come up. And I think that was a strategic decision by Harris, because she wanted to make this a domestic debate. And the fact is, most Americans are more concerned about the Hamas and Israel situation and the Ukraine situation. But writ large, Americans are generally much more focused on pocketbook issues than in foreign policy. And for this reason, I think Harris advisors rightly told her to steer away from foreign policy, where her base is a little bit divided on Israel and Hamas, and to focus instead on the pocketbook issues that would sway swing voters.
Yeah, it's always great talking to you. Some fabulous points there. Professor Elvin Lim, Dean, College of Integrative Studies at the Singapore Management University. China has expressed concern about what it calls the United States' manipulation of Hong Kong-related issues after the House of Representatives passed a bill which could force the closure of the city's economic and trade offices across the U.S. Well, it's part of the House's so-called China Week to push through more Beijing-related proposed legislation.
我们对美方操弄涉港议题、打压香港发展的恶劣行径表示强烈不满和坚决反对，已向美方提出严正交涉。
Well, the city's government says the move is a fact-twisting attack on Hong Kong and grossly interferes in its affairs. The Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office Certification Act would require a review of Hong Kong trade offices' privileges and exemptions in New York, Washington, and San Francisco. They would need to shut within 180 days if found to be operating without a high degree of autonomy from China. The bipartisan bill was passed overwhelmingly on Tuesday, but now has to go through the U.S. Senate before it can be signed by President Joe Biden and passed as law. Some U.S. lawmakers say the bill demonstrates Washington's solidarity with the persecuted citizens of Hong Kong, including media tycoon Jimmy Lai and pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong, both convicted under the city's national security laws. The West has repeatedly criticized the legislation as stifling democracy, but China and Hong Kong say that they are necessary to restore stability in the city. Coming up on East Asia tonight, Pope Francis gets a rousing welcome in Singapore, cheered on by 1,000 volunteers who made this trip possible. And why high fashion is jumping on the K-pop bandwagon and changing the faces fronting their brands. Pope Francis is in Singapore, the final leg of his Asia-Pacific tour. On landing at Changi Airport, the pontiff received flowers from children who also put up a dance performance for him. Outside the airport, he was given a rousing welcome by about 1,000 volunteers who helped to organize his trip. For many Catholics in Singapore, this will be their first time seeing the head of their church. The last papal visit was in 1986 by the late Pope John Paul II.
I feel so blessed. Sister, what do you feel?
Very blessed because it's a historic, Pope's historic visit to Singapore. Yeah, we are so blessed to welcome him.
I'm so excited to come here, but I never thought we can see him this distance. I feel like I'm so blessed right now, and I'm so happy.
It's just like a miracle. It'll never happen, this kind of miracle again in my whole life. Yeah, it was the best day ever. I love Pope. We all love Pope. We're all in one together. Yeah, thank you, Singapore. Thank you, Pope Francisco. Yeah, we love you. God bless you. Viva, viva, Papa!
Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong will hold a welcome ceremony for the Pope tomorrow at Parliament House. He will then deliver an address at the National University of Singapore before meeting government officials, civil society groups and members of the diplomatic corps. The Pope will cap the day with a mass at the National Stadium. More than 50,000 people are expected to attend. On Friday, Pope Francis will visit St. Teresa's home for the elderly. As he has done in the 3 other countries he's visited, the Pope will end his trip with an interreligious youth meeting, and that will be held at Catholic Junior College. And you can catch up with the latest from our coverage of the Pope's visit on our website, cna.asia. It looks like K-pop has not only muscled into the global music scene, its stars are now increasingly the faces of high fashion brands, all thanks to their legions of loyal fans.
K-pop fans were in a frenzy in May when all 8 members of Stray Kids made history as the first Korean group to attend the Met Gala. All of them decked out in custom Tommy Hilfiger tuxedos as the collective face of the brand's spring campaign. Hilfiger himself looks back fondly on that moment.
And we did a special label, Tommy Hilfiger with the Stray Kids, and they loved it. We loved it. And I think it'll go down in history as probably one of the most exciting projects we've had to date.
Turn this way, whoa, look at that!
Keeping us relevant was part of it, but also always looking for the next step is something we've done for many years. So that, in fact, has been a big benefit to the brand.
So big that the label has brought Stray Kids back as the faces of their fall campaign, posing on a rooftop in puffer jackets and preppy cold weather outfits. They are just one of an ever-increasing number of K-pop idols that luxury fashion houses are bringing into their ranks as brand ambassadors.
It was rock and then hip-hop, and now it's really K-pop.
Last year saw more than 24 stars installed as faces for labels who want to tap into the massive global fan bases that follow K-pop personalities. There's BTS's Jin at Gucci, Lisa from Blackpink at Louis Vuitton.
I feel so honored to be working with such a great brand that I admire.
Stray Kids' own Hyunjin is also a brand ambassador for Versace.
The outfits designed by Donatella feel very luxury.
Alison Bringe is the chief marketing officer at Launchmetrics, which measures brand success by its impact on media. For her, one key factor in the rise of K-pop brand ambassadors was the way events had to change during the COVID era.
And so they turned to these kind of virtual streaming or virtual attendees. And because of that, it allowed the world to open up and start bringing in more KOLs, more K-pop stars, different ambassadors from different parts of the world. And we could see fall, winter 2021, there was a huge emergence of K-pop stars attending all of these fashion shows. And it was because the world kind of was ready to leverage these different ambassadors to interact with a more digitally savvy audience.
In a Launchmetrics report on the men's Spring-Summer 2025 Paris Fashion Week, an event held in June, South Korea ranked as, quote, the 3rd top region driving buzz, with 87% generated by South Korean celebrities specifically. K-pop stars often draw out the loudest cheers from fans waiting outside Fashion Week shows. Many are expected again this catwalk season, and the trend doesn't look set to change. Lily from girl band NMIX says it's all a natural fit. She, too, is a brand ambassador for Spanish fashion house Loewe.
I think when you look at K-pop fans, they obviously like the members, but they also like the glitz and glamour of K-pop, and one of that is fashion. And because it's so important to a group's image, the companies and everything pay so much attention to fashion, which means that each group has its own kind of amazing style that you can kind of see. And I think that's another thing that makes fans excited to like a group. So I think fashion is very important to K-pop, and K-pop is very important to fashion.
And that does it for Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.